Why was her name the one no one called when it mattered most? The question lingered in Nora's chest like a weight, heavier than the rifle she carried, heavier than the silence she had lived with for years. She sat in the briefing room, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and yet she felt invisible. The chatter around the table wasn't cruel, but it was dismissive, casual, practiced. The SEALs laughed among themselves, trading sharp banter the way they traded magazines on deployment. They belonged here. She was tolerated, necessary. A cog in the machine, not the edge of the blade. The lieutenant colonel's voice cut through the noise, steady, precise, like the ticking of a clock counting down toward something none of them could yet see. Our designated marksman is out. Dengue fever. Won't recover in time. Will proceed without sniper support. Nora's throat tightened, but she spoke before she could think. Sir, her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden hush it carried. I'm qualified on the M24. I can cover the team. The pause that followed wasn't just silence, it was judgment. A heavy, invisible force that pressed on her skin like heat. The SEALs turned, some with faint smirks, some with outright disbelief. Captain leaned back, his voice smooth but edged with doubt. With respect, Sergeant, we're not talking about hitting paper at the range. We're talking about lives, pressure, split-second accuracy. She held his gaze. With respect, sir, my scores exceed sniper school standards. For a moment she thought she saw it, the flicker of possibility in his expression, the recognition that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't bluffing. But it vanished. The colonel shook his head. We won't risk an untested shooter, proceeding as planned. And just like that, the room moved on. As if she hadn't spoken at all. Her hands were steady on the table, but inside something cracked. She lived this moment before in different rooms with different faces. Always the same undertone. She was good, but not that good. Competent, reliable, but not someone you trust when the storm hit. And maybe that was the real sting, not the rejection itself, but the knowledge that if they truly saw her, truly understood her, they would never have to ask for proof. She left the briefing room quietly, walking the short distance back to her quarters. Each step felt heavier than her boots allowed. She closed the door behind her, sat on the narrow bunk, and let the silence envelop her. The hum of the base generators, the distant bark of orders, the scrape of metal against metal from the armory, it all faded. She reached under her bunk and pulled out the rifle case she had carried across continents, across years. The latches clicked open, familiar and final. The rifle wasn't standard issue anymore, not really. She had modified it piece by piece, sanding edges, adjusting triggers, replacing glass, recalibrating mounts. This wasn't just a weapon. It was the closest thing she had to truth. Every scratch told a story of trial and error. Every adjustment spoke of nights she had stayed awake when the others slept, lying prone in the dirt of forgotten ranges, measuring wind with the touch of her cheek, calculating distance with her breath. Her grandfather's words came back, uninvited but steady, like he was sitting across from her again. Sometimes the best soldiers are the ones nobody sees coming. She had been 12 years old, lying in the grass of Montana, watching her grandfather line up a shot on a deer half a field away. He hadn't spoken much, but when he did, the words carried weight. He had taught her patience, silence, humility. And that day, he had taught her the one thing she carried more closely than any weapon, that recognition didn't matter. Results did. But here, now, in this jungle outpost where men planned missions that meant life or death, recognition did matter. Because without it, 8 men were about to walk into the valley of shadows with no eyes watching their backs. She closed the rifle case gently, her fingers lingering on the worn metal latch. She could feel the decision pressing against her chest, inevitable, undeniable. She would go. Not for herself, for them. Hours later, the base was alive with movement. The SEALs moved like shadows, loaded and focused, their banter muted now, sharpened into the edges of discipline. Nora stood at her post in the comm center, headset snug, voice steady as she relayed coded messages, status updates, weather checks. To anyone watching, she was just another support soldier, fulfilling her role. Exactly where she was supposed to be. But beneath the console, in a duffel bag tucked against her boots, her rifle lay waiting. The insertion went smooth at first. Reports came in clipped and clean, team moving, no contact, target compound in sight. Nora tracked every call sign on the screen, her mind overlaying maps, terrain, and memory. She knew the ridge lines, the fields of fire, the places where the jungle opened into killing zones. She had studied them long after the others had dismissed the briefing. 3 hours in, the silence shattered. The radio crackled, panicked, sharp. Contact, multiple shooters, elevated positions, taking accurate fire, casualties. Her heart clenched. The sound of gunfire bled through the transmission, harsh and unrelenting. She could picture it, the team pinned in the valley, bullets cracking overhead, enemy fire raining from angles they couldn't counter. She had seen it in her head before the mission even launched. And now it was real. The command center erupted in noise. Officers scrambled, radios screamed for air support, medevac, reinforcements. The colonel's voice was controlled but urgent. They were hours away from help, hours the team didn't have. Nora stood, quietly. No one noticed at first. She slipped the headset off, set it gently on the console, and walked out the side door into the humid night. Her body moved on instinct, the way it had so many times before when she lined up a shot on an unsuspecting deer or ran drills until her muscles burned. She wasn't supposed to go, she wasn't cleared, she wasn't trusted, but none of that mattered anymore. Her boots sank into the jungle floor as she moved, each step careful, deliberate. She carried the rifle across her chest like a promise. She knew the way, the terrain she had memorized, the ridge line she had marked. The echoes of gunfire grew louder with every step. When she reached her vantage point, the sight through her scope confirmed everything. 3 enemy shooters, perfectly placed, overlapping fire. A trap woven tight around the seals. The kind of trap no amount of training could break. Her breath slowed. The world narrowed. It was just her, the rifle, and the target. She felt the old rhythm return, the rhythm her grandfather had drilled into her, the rhythm she had lived by in the stillness of Montana mornings. Inhale, hold, exhale. The first shot cracked the silence. 800 meters away, the first muzzle flash died. She shifted, moving low, silent, her body blending with the earth. The second shot traveled nearly 1,000 meters, threading through branches as if the bullet itself wanted to obey her will. The third followed, precise, final. Through the radio, she could hear confusion, relief, voices asking questions they didn't have answers to. Who's covering us? Where is that fire coming from? But she didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just stayed in the shadows, breathing steady, rifle warm against her hands, her heart calm for the first time all day. Because for once, the only thing that mattered, the only thing was that they lived, who had saved them. The question echoed not just in the valley where the firefight had ended, but in the minds of every man who survived it. The SEALs had been seconds away from being overrun. They knew it. They had felt it in the sting of dirt as bullets chewed the ground inches from their faces, in the heat of shrapnel tearing through the air, in the sharp metallic taste of fear at the back of their throats. And then, silence. Not the silence of death, but the silence of salvation. Shots had come, clean and surgical. Threats vanished one by one, as though some unseen guardian had been watching from the tree line, deciding their fate with the press of a trigger. They had moved then, cautiously, bewildered but alive. And as they regrouped, no one could give an answer. Who had been out there with them? Nora didn't wait to find out what they would decide. She had melted back into the jungle as soon as the third body went still. Her rifle was slung across her chest, her breathing calm but shallow, her movements precise. She knew the terrain too well to leave tracks. By the time the SEALs were moving again, she was already half a mile away, heading back toward base along a route she had chosen long before the mission began. Every step was steady, but inside her thoughts flickered with contradictions. Relief, shame, anger, pride. She had done what she knew was right, but in doing so she had crossed a line, Orders had boundaries. She had ignored them. The military was built on structure, and she had broken it. And yet, what was structure compared to the lives of 8 men who would have been buried under flags if she had stayed silent? Her grandfather's voice again. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. By the time she reached the outskirts of the base, dawn had started to seep into the horizon. The jungle air clung to her skin, humid and heavy, but the world was quieter now. She slipped through a service gate where cameras rarely swept, a detail she had memorized during months of moving unnoticed around the compound. Inside, she moved with the same composure she always carried, duffel on her shoulder, face unreadable. To anyone watching, she was just returning from a routine check. And yet in the command center, chaos still reigned. Reports were coming in, objective secure, SEALs extracting with casualties stabilized, target compound cleared. But woven into the chatter was the one thread no one could ignore: unknown sniper support. Source unidentified. Voices clashed over the radios, some demanding clarification, others brushing it aside in the urgency of evacuation. But when the helicopters touched down and the team stumbled out, mud-smeared, bloodied, exhausted, the mystery took root. "Sir, we were pinned," Captain admitted, his tone subdued, nothing like the confident skepticism he had carried into the briefing. "We should be dead, but something or someone took out those shooters, 3 of them clean, fast, from distances none of us could get eyes on." The colonel frowned. "And you're certain it wasn't one of our units in Overwatch?" "No, sir, no Overwatch, no support. Whoever it was wasn't on the roster." The words hung there heavy. In the military, uncertainty was a crack in the wall, and cracks widened if left unchecked. Someone had acted outside the plan, but that action had saved lives. How did you punish that? How did you reward it when no one even knew who it was? Nora didn't linger in the operations tent to hear the debates. She was already back at her bunk, her rifle disassembled, wiped clean, stowed in its case beneath her bed. Her uniform was replaced with a fresh one. Her boots shined just enough to pass inspection. She looked like what they believed her to be: a support soldier, quiet, reliable, unremarkable. But her chest ached with the truth she carried. Because no matter how carefully she concealed it, the jungle still lived in her veins. That night, as the base quieted, she sat on her bunk in the dim glow of a single lamp. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, not from guilt, but from something harder to name. She thought of their voices on the radio, the desperation, the edge of defeat, and then the relief, the way their tone had changed the instant they realized they had a chance again. She had given them that, not recognition, not glory, just a chance to live. And yet they didn't know it was her. And maybe they never would. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. The SEALs whispered about it among themselves, sometimes in the mess hall, sometimes during after-action reviews. They spoke of angles that didn't make sense, of shots that the chaos of battle. They speculated about hidden units, about black ops, about allies no one had briefed them on. The loudest skeptic before the mission now carried a quieter tone. He didn't boast as he once did. He asked questions instead, though no answers came. The colonel wasn't satisfied. He launched an investigation, subtle at first, then more pointed. Cameras were checked, logs reviewed, personnel movements tracked, but the jungle kept its secrets well, and so did Nora. Until one evening, 2 days after the mission, when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Colonel Hayes standing there, his posture as rigid as the frame of the door itself. His eyes swept the room quickly, then landed on her. "Sergeant, walk with me." She followed him without a word, the air between them taut with unspoken things. He led her to a small office, away from the noise of the main compound. Once inside, he closed the door and leaned against the desk. "Funny thing," he began, his voice calm but edged with something sharper. "When a team reports sniper fire that doesn't come from the enemy, I expect answers. So I reviewed base security footage." Her stomach tightened, but she kept her face still. "Sir." He studied her, silent for a long moment. Then, you left the comms center during the firefight. You returned 3 hours later, exact window of the engagement. No authorization, no explanation. She exhaled slowly. Yes, sir. That's it, yes, sir. Her eyes lifted, meeting his. For once she didn't soften her tone. They would have died, sir, you know that. The colonel's jaw clenched. He wasn't angry in the way she expected, not yelling, not even disappointed. He was conflicted, wrestling with something inside himself. You disobeyed orders, broke chain of command, acted outside mission parameters, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. You saved them, clean shots, professional work, not luck. Silence stretched, then he leaned forward. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Nora hesitated. The truth pressed against her lips, old memories rising, the Montana mountains, her grandfather's weathered hands, the sound of a rifle crack echoing across endless fields. But she only said, years of practice, sir. Years no one asked about. For the first time, Hayes' eyes softened. He nodded once slowly. I don't know what to do with you, Sergeant. You don't fit into a box I can check, but I'll tell you this. Your secret won't stay secret forever. He dismissed her then, and she returned to her bunk with the weight of his words still lingering. She lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling. She had acted in shadows her whole life, comfortable there, invisible, but shadows, she realized, can only hold secrets for so long before the light finds them. And when it did, what then? Why did they look at her differently now? It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. A pause in conversation when she walked past, a nod that hadn't been there before. Not respect exactly, but curiosity, suspicion wrapped in silence. Nora had lived her entire military life in the background, and now, without a single word spoken, the shadows she had relied on seemed to shift around her. The SEALs hadn't spoken openly about it. They couldn't. Speculation about an unregistered sniper wasn't the kind of rumor that circulated lightly, but warriors noticed details, and these men, sharp, trained, meticulous, noticed everything. They remembered the way she had spoken up in the briefing. They remembered her calm insistence that she could cover them. And they remembered how, when the ambush should have ended them, unseen fire had carved a path out of certain death. The pieces weren't hard to assemble, but none of them had the courage yet to say it aloud. In the mess hall one evening, Nora sat with her tray, quiet as always, eyes on her food. She listened to the clatter of utensils, the murmur of conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from men who had survived something they still didn't understand. Captain entered with two of his operators, all three limping slightly, bandages visible beneath rolled sleeves. Their voices were low, their expressions guarded. Yet when eyes swept the room, they landed on her. Not for long, but long enough. She felt it, the weight of it, the question behind it. But he said nothing. And neither did she. Later, as the night fell and the jungle pressed in around the compound, Nora sat alone outside the barracks, the warm metal of her rifle case resting against her leg. She hadn't opened it since that day. She hadn't needed to. And yet the pull of it was constant, like a heartbeat she could hear in the silence. She thought of the men trapped in that valley, their voices raw with desperation. She thought of the crack of her rifle, the finality of each shot. She thought of the stillness that had followed. And for the first time, she wondered if she had changed something she couldn't take back. Recognition wasn't what she wanted. She had built her entire identity on being invisible, support staff, background, a gear that turned quietly while others carried the spotlight. But now the spotlight threatened to swing toward her, whether she wanted it or not. And the truth was, she wasn't sure she belonged in it. The following morning, Colonel Hayes summoned her again. His office smelled faintly of coffee and damp earth, the windows cracked to let in the heavy jungle air. He didn't waste time. The SEALs are asking questions, he said, his eyes fixed on her. I can't keep their curiosity contained much longer. Nora stood at attention, silent. Hayes leaned back, folding his arms. You're in a dangerous position, Sergeant. If I deny it was you, they'll keep guessing. If I confirm it, you're exposed. Either way, your life here doesn't stay the same. Her voice was steady. "I don't want exposure, sir." "I believe you." His expression softened slightly. "But they deserve answers. You saved them, Nora. They know it. Maybe they don't want to admit it yet, but they know." The use of her first name startled her. Hayes rarely slipped into familiarity. It reminded her that, beneath his rank, he was still a man, one who had seen enough war to know the value of someone who could act when no one else would. "Permission to speak freely, sir." He nodded. "I didn't do it for them to know. I did it because it was the right thing, because leaving them there would have been wrong." She hesitated, then added softly, "I don't need them to see me. I just need them to live." For a long moment, Hayes said nothing. Then he exhaled, slow and tired. "Sometimes, Sergeant, that kind of humility is more dangerous than arrogance, because sooner or later the world won't let you hide." She left his office unsettled. His words lingered long after, echoing louder than the jungle itself. 2 nights later, the SEALs cornered her, not aggressively, not even, but directly. It was who approached, his limp more pronounced now after a long day's work. He found her in the armory, where she was methodically checking inventory, every weapon gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Sergeant," he began, voice careful. She looked up, her hand still resting on the steel of an M4 carbine. "Captain." He studied her for a moment, as though weighing the cost of the question on his tongue. Then, "Was it you?" Her breath caught. He hadn't softened it, hadn't wrapped it in plausible deniability. Just 3 words, sharp and precise. Her instinct screamed to deny, to deflect, to vanish back into the role she had always played. But his eyes, wary, humbled, no longer arrogant, held something she hadn't seen before: gratitude. She didn't answer directly. She simply said, "Would it matter if it was?" Tilted his head, considering. "It matters to me because I doubted you, I dismissed you, and if I was wrong, I need to live with that." Nora looked back at the rifle in her hands, tracing the cold lines of the weapon with her fingers. Her grandfather's words echoed again. "Ego is the enemy of good shooting." She swallowed. "What matters is that you all made it home." Silence stretched between them, then gave a single nod, not of certainty but of acceptance. He didn't press further. He turned and left, leaving her alone in the glow of the armory lights. And yet from that night on, the way the SEALs looked at her shifted again. No longer suspicion, no longer mere curiosity, something else. A respect that ran quiet but deep, the kind that wasn't spoken aloud but lived in small gestures. A seat left open at their table, a nod in passing, a voice lowered when she entered the room. It should have comforted her. Instead, it made her uneasy, because respect could be as dangerous as dismissal. Respect meant recognition. Recognition meant exposure. One morning, during a weapons inspection, a younger SEAL named lingered after the others had gone. He was barely 24, sharp-eyed, still carrying the raw edges of someone not yet ground down by years of war. "You don't talk much, Sergeant," he said, adjusting the strap on his rifle. "Not much to say." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I don't care what the colonel says. Whoever it was out there, they saved my life. And if it was you," his gaze held hers, "thank you." She didn't reply. She couldn't. But the sincerity in his eyes stayed with her long after he left. That night, lying awake on her bunk, Nora stared at the ceiling and felt a strange weight settle over her. For years, invisibility had been her armor. But what if the armor was cracking? What if, in saving them, she had surrendered the very thing that kept her safe? Her pulse quickened at the thought, not from fear, but from something harder to admit: the possibility that she was meant for more than shadows. The jungle outside buzzed with life. Cicadas hummed. Distant thunder rumbled. And inside her chest, 2 truths warred quietly: her need to remain unseen and the growing pull toward a role she had never sought but could no longer deny. What happens when the shadows can no longer hide you? The question gnawed at Nora in the quiet moments, when the compound stilled and the jungle swallowed the noise of men and machines. Recognition was creeping toward her like dawn through thick leaves, slow, unstoppable. She had spent years shaping herself into a ghost, unnoticed but essential. Yet one mission, one set of shots fired in the dark, had changed everything. And now another mission was coming. The announcement came at dusk, the air heavy with the smell of rain that never seemed to fall. Colonel Hayes gathered the teams in the briefing tent, his voice steady, the light from the projector casting hard shadows across his face. "New intelligence," he said, gesturing to a grainy satellite image of jungle terrain. "Enemy remnants regrouping here. Strong defenses. Hostage situation confirmed. Mission priority, extraction." The SEALs leaned forward, their bodies tense, their eyes sharp. They lived for this. Nora stood at the edge of the tent, arms crossed, expression calm. She wasn't supposed to be in the circle. Her role was logistics, comms, support, but Hayes had asked her to be there. A quiet decision, a message only she could hear. He continued, his tone clipped. "Same terrain challenges, elevated positions, expect counter-sniper fire. We go in tomorrow at 0400. The words hung heavy. Elevated positions. Sniper fire. Everyone in the room remembered what had happened the last time those words had been spoken. Everyone remembered the miracle that had followed. His gaze flicked toward her then, brief but unmistakable. It wasn't the old doubt. It wasn't even curiosity anymore. It was a test. A silent question. Will you step out of the shadows, or will you let us walk blind again? Nora said nothing. She kept her arms folded, her expression unreadable, but inside her chest burned. That night she couldn't sleep. Rain finally broke across the base, pounding against the tin roofs, filling the air with the smell of wet earth. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, the words of the briefing replaying again and again. Elevated positions, counter-snipers. Her mind drifted back to the men's voices on the radio, desperate and afraid. She had heard the breaking point in them once before. She could not hear it again. But this time would be different. This time, if she acted, she would not be alone. Too many eyes were watching. At 3 in the morning, the teams assembled, silent and focused. Gear checked, weapons loaded, moved with his usual precision, though his limp slowed him slightly. Cracked his knuckles, his face younger than the lines of war etched across it. Each man carried the same look Nora had seen 1,000 times before, the look of soldiers walking into uncertainty. And she carried her rifle, officially this time. Hayes had handed her the assignment quietly, almost reluctantly, the night before. "Support element," he had said, sliding the papers across his desk. "No mention of sniper, just support, but you know what this means." She had nodded. She hadn't thanked him. There were no thanks needed between them anymore, just an understanding. The jungle swallowed them before dawn. The air was thick, clinging to skin and fabric, the ground soft under boots. Nora moved with practiced silence, every step calculated, every sound measured. Her rifle rested across her chest like an extension of her body. She could feel the SEAL's awareness of her presence, unspoken, heavy. They weren't dismissing her anymore, but they weren't sure what to expect either. Hours into the insertion, the first shot cracked, sharp, precise. Enemy fire from high ground. The team dropped instantly, instincts flaring, weapons scanning. Bullets sliced through leaves overhead, ripping bark from trees, the jungle alive with violence. "Sniper ridgeline east," someone shouted. Nora's pulse slowed, not quickened, slowed. She dropped to prone, rifle already sliding into position, scope catching the faint glint of metal through branches. Distance, 700 meters. Wind, steady cross breeze. Angle, steep. Her breathing steadied. Inhale, hold, exhale. The trigger broke clean. The glint vanished, the jungle stilled. The SEALs froze for half a heartbeat, then pushed forward, moving with renewed urgency. Glanced back once, just once, his eyes meeting hers. No words, no nod, just recognition. But the jungle wasn't done. Another shot cracked from the opposite ridge, this one closer, sharper. Stumbled, a line of red appearing across his arm. He dropped to cover, teeth gritted. Nora was already shifting, crawling low, adjusting her angle. She spotted the shooter, half-hidden, camouflaged, clever. Range, 900. She adjusted, calculated, pressed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and silence followed again. Exhaled, clutching his wound but alive. He looked at her from across the clearing, sweat and blood mixing on his face. His lips formed the words without sound. "Thank you." The mission pressed on. They reached the compound, firefights breaking out in bursts of chaos, shouts, grenades, the thunder of automatic fire. Nora stayed on the periphery, her scope sweeping, her shots precise. Each trigger pull was a promise: cover, protection, unseen guardianship. By the time the hostages were secured and the compound cleared, the SEALs were still standing. Bloodied, battered, but standing. And this time there was no mystery about why. On the silence filled the helicopter. Not exhaustion, though that was there too, but something heavier. Sat across from her, eyes steady, thoughtful. Leaned back, arm bandaged, gaze lingering on her with quiet gratitude. Even the others, men hardened enough to mask everything, looked at her differently. Not suspicion, not dismissal. Respect, real, undeniable respect. And Nora, she didn't know how to carry it. Back at base, as the sun rose and the jungle glistened from the night's rain, Hayes met them on the landing pad. His eyes scanned the team, noting the hostages, the wounded, the exhausted relief. Then his gaze landed on her. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, but in his eyes she saw it. Confirmation. Later, alone in her quarters, she sat on her bunk, rifle across her lap. Her hands traced the familiar lines of it, the weight grounding her. For so long she had believed her role was to remain unseen, to be the quiet gear in the machine. But now the shadows were fatting. The men she had saved had seen her, truly seen her. And with that came a new weight, heavier than dismissal, heavier than invisibility. Expectation. What if she failed them next time? What if she couldn't carry the weight they now placed on her shoulders? The thought pressed against her chest like a hand, steady and suffocating. She closed her eyes, hearing again the words her grandfather had spoken long ago. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. But in the silence of her room, she wondered, what happens when dignity is forced to speak? Whether it wants to or not, why did silence feel heavier now than it ever had before? Nora had always lived in quiet corners, the armory, the ranges no one visited after dark, the edges of briefing rooms where her voice carried no weight. That silence had once been freedom, freedom from judgment, freedom from recognition. But now silence was different. Now it was filled with eyes, watching, expecting, measuring. The SEALs didn't speak about it openly, not in front of her, but she felt it in every room she entered. The subtle pauses, the respect in their nods. The way didn't dismiss her anymore, but instead weighed her presence like a factor in every plan. Even, still bandaged from the graze that could have been his end, looked at her with a reverence that unsettled her more than the old dismissals ever had. She had given them survival, but survival came with a price. Alone in her quarters, she disassembled her rifle again, though it didn't need cleaning. The movements were mechanical, soothing. Metal pieces laid out in perfect symmetry on the table. She ran a cloth across the barrel, not for maintenance, but to steady her own hands. Every pull of the rag was a breath drawn against the storm in her chest. Failure. The word whispered at her, sharp as the crack of a missed shot. It had never haunted her before, because no one had expected her to succeed. She had lived unburdened, invisible. Now, expectation coiled around her like barbed wire. Her grandfather's voice came back, softer this time, almost apologetic. "Patience, Nora. The shot will always wait for you, but you must decide if you're ready to take it." For the first time, she wondered if she was. A week passed before the next mission came. This time, Nora wasn't at the edge of the briefing tent. She was in the circle. Hayes had made no formal announcement, no grand acknowledgement, but her presence spoke louder than words. Didn't question it. The SEALs didn't object. She was part of them now, in ways she hadn't chosen but couldn't undo. The operation was smaller, an intelligence grab, high risk but contained. The target, a courier moving through jungle villages protected by a ring of militants. The danger wasn't the numbers, it was the precision. One mistake, one missed shot, and the courier would vanish into the trees, taking vital information with him. As Hayes laid out the plan, Nora felt the eyes on her again. Not skeptical, not dismissive, but trusting. And that trust sat like a stone in her stomach. That night before the mission, she walked to the edge of the base. The jungle stretched before her, endless, restless, alive with the hum of insects and the rustle of unseen movement. She closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. For years, she had loved moments like this, where the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. But tonight, peace eluded her. She thought of Montana, of lying in the grass as a child, her grandfather beside her, pointing out the way the wind bent the tall stalks, how it whispered direction if you only listened. She thought of the deer she had tracked for hours, the patience it took to wait for the single clear shot. Back then, it had been simple. Just her, the rifle, the world. Now it was different. Every shot carried names, faces, lives. She whispered into the darkness, though no one could hear. What if I can't carry it? The jungle gave no answer, only the steady chorus of insects, indifferent and eternal. The mission launched before dawn. The team moved quickly, silently, through terrain slick with mist. Nora carried her rifle, every part of her body alive with tension. She was no longer invisible. Every man there knew exactly why she was with them. And though no one said it, the weight was clear. She was not allowed to fail. Hours passed before contact. The courier's convoy appeared, 3 trucks moving fast along a jungle road, armed men perched in the beds, rifles scanning. The SEALs moved into position, preparing to ambush, but the courier himself never left the center vehicle. The windows were blacked out. The angles were tight. His voice whispered in her ear, calm but urgent. We need the driver neutralized. No driver, convoy stops, we move. Her hands settled on the rifle. Scope aligned. Distance, 600 meters. Wind light barely noticeable. Target partially obscured. It was not an impossible shot. She had made harder. But the weight in her chest, it wasn't calculation. It was fear. What if she missed? What if the round ricocheted, gave away their position, cost the team everything? She exhaled, steadying herself. Inhale, hold, exhale. Her finger hovered on the trigger. And for a moment she froze. Her mind fractured into 1,000 memories. The faces of the men she had already saved. The weight of their trust. The voice of her grandfather telling her results mattered more than recognition. The silence of her own doubts pressing in like the jungle around her. Then clarity, the kind that only came when everything else fell away. She squeezed. The driver slumped. The truck swerved, skidding sideways, blocking the road. The convoy stopped, militants shouting in confusion. The SEALs moved in, swift and brutal, neutralizing threats, pulling the courier from the vehicle before he could flee. It was over in minutes. The team exfiltrated quickly, but the ride back was different this time. No one whispered, no one speculated, no one questioned. They all knew. Leaned toward her in the helicopter, his voice low enough that only she could hear. We don't doubt you anymore, Sergeant. Not one of us. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the floor, rifle resting across her lap, heart pounding harder than it had during the shot itself. Because the truth wasn't in their doubt anymore. The truth was in hers. Back at base, she couldn't sleep. She sat with her rifle in pieces before her, the cloth trembling slightly in her hands. The mission had been a success. The courier had been captured. Lives had been saved. But all she could hear was the echo of that moment before the shot, the hesitation, the crack in her armor. And she wondered, was she carrying them, or were they carrying her now? How many times could a heart carry the weight of lives before it broke? Nora asked herself that question in the silence of her room night after night. The jungle outside buzzed with endless life, but inside her chest everything was still. Too still. The missions had been successes. Every shot had landed. Every man had come home. And yet her hands trembled when no one was watching. Her mind replayed the pause, the hesitation that had nearly frozen her during the courier mission. No one else noticed. But she did. The SEALs saw precision, calm, and confidence. They had come to trust her the way soldiers trust the ground beneath their boots. She was no longer invisible. She was something rarer, indispensable. And that was what terrified her most, because she wasn't sure she deserved it. During the days, she hid it well. She moved through the armory with her usual focus, checked her weapons with quiet ritual, listened during briefings without speaking unless spoken to. To the men, she was steady as stone. But at night, when the compound dimmed and the world grew heavy with sleep, the cracks widened. She dreamed of Montana, the rolling fields, the still mornings, her grandfather's voice like gravel and wisdom. But the deer she once watched became faces now. Faces of men who had looked at her with hope in their eyes. Faces of men who would be buried if she faltered again. One night she woke with a start, sweat cold on her skin, her hands clutching the sheets as if they were the grip of her rifle. Her breath came fast, ragged. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering to the dark, "What if I miss? What if I fail?" The darkness gave no answer. It wasn't long before another mission came. A rescue this time. 2 American aid workers taken by insurgents, held deep in the jungle near a village bristling with armed guards. Intelligence suggested the hostages were alive, but time was slipping. The SEALs prepared with grim efficiency, their faces set, their bodies tense. Nora watched them quietly, her chest tightening with every movement. They trusted her now. More than that, they expected her, and the expectation weighed more heavily than the rifle on her back. The insertion was silent, the jungle thick with mist. Nora moved at the rear, eyes scanning, scope ready, every sense alive. When they reached the outskirts of the village, the team fanned out, signaling positions. Nora climbed higher ground, her vantage point giving her over the compound. Through her scope she saw them. The hostages, 2 civilians, hands bound, faces pale with fear. Guards circled lazily, rifles slung, overconfident. Easy shots, but easy shots had killed good men before. The team crept closer, and then too quickly the silence broke. A dog barked, a guard shouted. The compound erupted in chaos, gunfire, shouting, bodies scattering. Nora locked onto her first target, a guard raising his weapon toward. She inhaled, exhaled, squeezed. The man fell. She shifted, sighting another. The rifle cracked again. Another down. But then she froze. Her scope found one of the hostages, pulled forward by a guard using him as cover, dragging him toward a truck. The shot was there. Narrow, but there. A window that would close in seconds. She adjusted, breath caught. What if I miss? Her finger trembled on the trigger. Sweat stung her eyes. The guard's rifle pressed into the hostage's neck. The SEALs were too far, too pinned. The moment stretched, taut and suffocating. And then she pulled. The shot rang true. The guard fell. The hostage stumbled free. Relief should have come, but it didn't. Not fully. Because for those seconds she had hesitated again. And hesitation in war was its own kind of wound. The mission ended in success. The hostages were secured. The team exfiltrated under fire, battered but alive. On the ride back, the air in the helicopter was thick with exhaustion and adrenaline. Grinned through bloodied lips. "Hell of a shot, Sergeant. You saved him." She forced a small nod, her hands folded tightly in her lap. But inside, her chest ached. They saw perfection. She felt fracture. Back at base, found her alone in the armory, cleaning her rifle as if scrubbing away doubt itself. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes steady. "You're quiet," he said. "I usually am." "Not like this." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. I saw it today, the pause. You had the shot, but you almost didn't take it. Her hands stilled, she didn't look at him. And yet I did. Yes, you did. And you saved him. But you're carrying something heavier than the rifle. I see it in your eyes. Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to push him away with silence. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. What if next time I can't? For a moment said nothing. Then he crouched beside her, his voice quiet but sharp. Then you're human, same as the rest of us. The difference is you don't let the fear stop you. That's what matters. She looked at him then, really looked. The man who had once doubted her, dismissed her, now speaking with the kind of trust she didn't even hold for herself. And for the first time, she let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as fragile as she believed. But later, lying awake in the silence of her room, she knew the truth. Cracks remained. And cracks, no matter how small, spread when the weight grew heavier. The jungle outside whispered endlessly, its voice older than war, older than fear. And Nora, staring at the ceiling, whispered back, "How long until I break? What happens when the one person they all trust no longer trusts herself?" The question followed Nora into the briefing room like a shadow she couldn't shake. The map projected on the wall looked like all the others, lines, terrain markers, red dots that meant enemy strength. But this mission wasn't like the others. Hayes' voice was lower, carrying a gravity she hadn't heard before. "Intelligence confirms high-value target," he said, pointing to a compound deep in the jungle. "Large force, heavily armed, more than 50 fighters. The compound sits on high ground, surrounded by overlapping fields of fire, and we have reason to believe they've fortified with heavy weapons." Exhaled slowly, a sound somewhere between frustration and focus. The room was silent otherwise. Hayes' gaze moved across the team before settling on Nora. "This will be the hardest op we've faced here, and make no mistake, it may not go as planned. Our only advantage is surprise and precision." Precision. The word hit her like a weight. She kept her face calm, but inside her chest tightened. Precision was her responsibility now. The men in that room didn't say it, didn't need to. They all knew it. She had become their anchor, their silent guardian in the shadows. And if she faltered this time, if her hesitation returned, it wouldn't just be one life at risk. It would be all of them. That night she sat alone on the edge of her bunk, her rifle across her lap. The lamplight caught the steel, glinting like memory. She traced her fingers along the stock, the worn marks that told the story of 1,000 hours of practice, of Montana mornings, of her grandfather's steady hands guiding her own. "You carry them now," she whispered to the empty room. "All of them." The jungle greeted them with silence when they launched, as if holding its breath. The approach was long, hours of movement through terrain that seemed to tighten around them. Nora moved with practiced stillness, but her mind roared. Every rustle in the leaves sounded like doubt. Every step pressed heavier with the knowledge of what awaited them. When the compound finally came into view, it was worse than she'd imagined. Lights swept across the perimeter. Fighters patrolled in organized lines. Heavy weapons stood mounted, ready. Elevated towers offered perfect sniper positions. They settled into cover, observing, planning, whispered orders. Hayes relayed updates through comms. Nora lay prone, scope aligned, scanning, measuring. Every breath was a calculation. Her first shot would matter most. It would decide whether the team advanced or fell. Her crosshairs settled on the tower to the north, where a sniper scanned the tree line lazily, unaware of what stalked him from the shadows. Range, 800 meters. Wind, shifting. Angle, downward. Her finger brushed the trigger. And froze. The hesitation returned, sharp as a blade. Images flooded her mind, the courier, the hostage, the seconds where she had almost failed. Her pulse quickened, her breath catching. What if I miss? What if I cost them everything? Voices crackled in her headset. "We're exposed out here. We need that tower down now." Voice, steady but urgent. "We're waiting on you." The words cut deeper than any bullet could. "We're waiting on you." Her chest ached. She squeezed her eyes shut just for a second, and in that second she saw him, her grandfather, standing in a field of tall grass, the horizon endless behind him. His voice wasn't stern. It wasn't heavy. It was gentle. "You're not aiming to be perfect, Nora. You're aiming to be steady. Perfection breaks people. Steadiness saves them." Her breath steadied. Her finger tightened. The rifle cracked. The tower went silent. Her body shifted instantly, recalculating. The second tower, 900 meters crosswind, another shot, another fall. A machine gun nest next, muzzle flashing. Her bullet found the operator's chest, halting the spray of fire. The SEALs moved forward, shadows cutting through chaos. The jungle lit with gunfire, shouts, explosions. But through it all, her scope remained steady, her shots clean. Every trigger pull silenced another threat, carved another path for the men to advance. Yet even as her body worked, her mind fought itself. Each shot brought relief, but also the gnawing fear. What if the next one isn't there? What if the crack in me finally widens? Minutes stretched into eternity. The compound fell piece by piece, fighters scattering, some standing their ground only to be silenced from unseen distance. Nora barely registered the SEALs' progress anymore. She lived inside the scope, inside the rhythm of breath and trigger, inside the fragile space where steadiness battled fear. Then, the moment that would define it all. A door burst open in the compound. The high-value target himself, flanked by guards, shoving a hostage in front of him as a shield. They moved fast, toward a truck idling at the edge of the clearing. His voice came sharp in her ear. "Target's moving, take the shot." Her scope locked on. Distance, nearly 1,000 meters. Target shielded, moving. The margin of error was razor thin. One mistake and the hostage would fall. One hesitation and the target would escape. Her breath caught, her chest burned. The world narrowed. What if I can't? What if I fail them all? She almost faltered, almost. But then her grandfather's words rose again. Not about ego, not about perfection, about dignity. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She acted. The rifle cracked. The guard holding the hostage fell. Another crack, the second guard dropped. A third, the target himself crumpled before he could reach the truck. The hostage stumbled free, alive, terrified, but alive. The compound fell silent in the aftermath, smoke rising, the jungle heavy with the smell of gunpowder and rain. The SEALs regrouped, dragging the hostage to safety, their voices ragged with exhaustion but alive with triumph. Nora stayed prone, her rifle cooling against her cheek, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For the first time in weeks, the hesitation was gone, not because she had silenced it, but because she had accepted it. Fear would always be there. Doubt would always whisper, but steadiness was stronger. Sat beside her in the helicopter, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes sharp but softer than she'd ever seen them. He didn't say much, just leaned close enough for her to hear over the roar of the rotors. "You don't have to hide anymore, Sergeant." She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. But for once, the silence inside her didn't feel heavy. It felt steady. Why did the silence after victory feel heavier than the gunfire itself? Back at base, the jungle had returned to its usual chorus: cicadas, rustling leaves, the distant growl of rain-heavy skis. But inside the compound, silence carried its own weight. The SEALs moved slower now, their bodies worn, their faces shadowed with exhaustion. Success had cost them as it always did. And yet, this time the cost was survivable. Because of her. Nora moved through the armory with her usual quiet precision, hands running across rifles and gear, checking what needed repair. But the air around her was different now. Men passed and nodded, not the absent-minded respect they gave competent staff, but something else, something deeper. She felt it in its gaze, in its grin, in the unspoken way no one doubted her place among them anymore. She had saved them, yes, but she had also revealed herself. That revelation left her restless. At night, when the base quieted, she sat with her rifle across her lap, staring at it like a mirror. She thought of the Montana fields, of her grandfather's steady voice, of the girl who had once been invisible. That girl was gone now. The shadows had carried her as far as they could. And yet, she did not regret stepping out of them. One evening, Hayes called her into his office. His desk was cluttered with reports, his face lined with the weight of command. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You've changed things, Sergeant," he said. "Not just for this team, for everyone who hears the story. Word is spreading, quietly but spreading." She shifted, uncomfortable. "That was never my goal." "I know." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing but not unkindly. "That's what makes it real. You didn't do it for credit, you did it because it had to be done." He paused, then added, "The SEALs are alive because of you, and they'll never forget it." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. After she left his office, she found waiting near the armory. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching her approach. "You know," he said, his voice softer than usual, "the first day you spoke up in that briefing, I thought you were reckless. Just another support soldier trying to step into a role you didn't understand." She raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He exhaled, a small, almost rueful smile on his lips. "Now I know you understand it better than any of us, and I'm glad I was wrong." For a moment neither spoke. The weight of all that had passed between them, doubt, dismissal, survival, respect, hung in the air. Then he straightened, his expression serious again. "We won't forget, none of us. You're one of us now, whether you asked for it or not." She felt the words settle in her chest, heavier than she expected. One of them. After years of invisibility, the recognition should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like something quieter, something steadier. Belonging. Weeks passed. Missions continued. The jungle remained unforgiving, the battles relentless. But through it all, Nora carried herself differently. Not louder, not prouder, just steadier. The hesitation still whispered sometimes, the doubt still pressed against her ribs in the dark. But she had learned something in that compound, something her grandfather had tried to teach her long ago. Perfection wasn't the goal. Steadiness was. And steadiness, she realized, wasn't about silence. It was about trust, trust in herself, trust earned from those who had once doubted her. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon in streaks of red and gold, Nora sat on the edge of the base, her rifle resting beside her. Found her there, quiet as always. He sat down next to her, his young face lined by battles that aged him faster than years could. "You ever think about what it means?" he asked, staring out at the endless jungle. What means?" she replied. "Saving people like that, carrying it." His voice was softer now. "I think about it all the time, about how close it gets, about how sometimes I'm alive because someone else wasn't afraid to take the shot." She let his words linger before answering. "I think about it too, every time." He glanced at her, studying her profile in the fading light. "And it doesn't break you." She exhaled slowly, her eyes tracing the horizon. "It cracks me sometimes, but maybe that's the point. You can't carry this kind of weight without cracks. What matters is whether you keep moving anyway." They sat in silence after that, the jungle humming around them, the day giving way to night. Later, alone, Nora wrote a letter she would never send. A letter to the man who had shaped her long before the jungle, long before the rifle had become her second skin. "Grandpa, you were right. Recognition doesn't matter. Results do, but you never told me that results come with their own weight. That saving people feels as heavy as losing them. Maybe you knew I had to learn it myself. Maybe you knew the cracks would come. But I think I understand now. It's not about being unbreakable. It's about being steady, even when you are broken." She folded the paper, tucked it into her journal, and set it aside. The war went on. Missions blurred together. Victories and losses marked the days. But through it all, Nora remained, quiet, steady, unseen by the world beyond those who knew her, but unforgettable to the men who had lived because of her. And in the end, perhaps that was enough. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.